Spirits is a history and comedy podcast focused on everything folklore, mythology, and the occult, told through the lens of feminism, queerness, and modern adulthood. Every week, mythology buff Julia and her childhood best friend Amanda get together to learn about a different story from mythology and folklore over drinks. That's everything from the mythological origins of major franchises like Lord of the Rings and Wonder Woman, to modern urban legends, to a roundup of werewolf stories from around the world. Start listening with any of the 450 plus episodes that they've released over the last 9 years. There's so much to enjoy, whether you're here for analyses of mental health and mythology or creepy modern ghost stories. Subscribe to Spirits in your podcast app now. That's Spirits from the Multitude Podcast Collective. Hi, Tiny Matters listeners. Sam here. Deboki and I are joined today by Alexis Pedrick, who is the host of Distillations, a podcast from the Science History Institute. We are very excited to have Alexis here and to talk a little bit about the episode that we'll have on Tiny Matters today. But first, I think we have a couple questions for Alexis.
Oh, I like that. Hello.
It's fun to be on the other side, I think.
It is. It is. I'm never on the other side.
Well, maybe to start, can you give our listeners just maybe a quick overview of Distillations?
Sure. So Distillations, we have been around. Actually, I'm amazed. I think we're one of the longest running museum podcasts in the country. We've been doing this for well over a decade at this point. But I like to describe our show as documentaries for your ears is basically how we approach storytelling about the history of science. And our stories sort of go from the very serious, like the episode we're going to listen to today and talk about, to also the eccentric. You know, we've covered how sort of vampires have this connection to our thoughts about illness, and we've talked about ghost hunting and the technology that they use and how science ties into all of that. And so we try to we sort of run the gamut.
Yeah, and I will say, I love how complementary I think Tiny Matters and Distillations are. As you were just mentioning those topics, my first thought was, oh yeah, we've covered those.
Exactly.
We've covered them in a different way. Our angles are always a little or very different, but maybe same topic, but very different approaches.
Yes.
I will, work on our episode and then come across an episode from you all and listen and be like, oh my gosh, I have this additional understanding of a thing that I felt like I understood so well, but maybe now I understand the societal impact even more. Or maybe there's some, historic moment that we didn't get to in Tiny Matters that you all included and really went down the rabbit hole with. So for me, that is so fun as a producer and host of an Other Sides podcast.
Absolutely. And whenever I hear you guys do an episode that I know we've been through that topic, I'm like, oh, okay, we're not crazy. We also, someone else finds this interesting. We're on the right path.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
So, but I mean, the history of science is vast, right? It's this vast sort of deep topic. And it is sort of incredible that, you can talk about one particular story, one particular person, and you can have multiple episodes about them and still not touch the same content about them. I that's one of my favorite things about this.
Yeah, has there been anything that you've worked on that's been especially surprising?
Oh, I think well, I will say one of my favorite episodes, and we've did this recently. It's an episode called The People versus Recombinant DNA. And we were talking about the history of recombinant DNA and cloning and the development of biotech. And we were sort of joking because we used Jurassic Park as like a way to sort of talk about the history of cloning.
It's a perfect like cultural touch point to enter this
really
conversation.
It really is. And as a connoisseur of the Jurassic Park films, but we were sort of like laughing and joking, like, ha ha ha, isn't it silly that, like, you know, it's kind of funny that this movie had such a big impact. And then we continued working on the season, and we came across this movie called The Andromeda Strain. Have you guys seen this?
No.
Okay. It's a very 70s like sci-fi sort of horror film where like you know, aliens are coming, obviously, and they're not nice. They're never nice. And that there's this danger that you know, that a germ is gonna like spread everywhere, and it's gonna basically kill everyone, right? That's always how it's gonna be,
Right.
And the underlying sort of thing in that movie was taking all of those fears in that era about cloning and about the work that was being done with recombinant DNA, and sort of saying, like, worst case scenario, what could happen if something got out of the lab and sort of took over and made everyone sick or killed them or put us in some sort of danger. And that when this debate at Harvard happens over whether or not they can build a recombinant DNA lab, one of the things that happens is one of the people on city councils watching Andromeda Strain, and they go, oh my God, anything could happen. Horrors could happen. Are we talking about what could happen if something goes wrong? And so they sort of take that and those fears, and they start saying, like, we actually need to talk more about this. We need to have more questions. Like, how is this lab being built? How's it going to keep people safe? How are we going to prevent something from going terribly wrong? How can we, it's this like wonderful moment where like scientists who at that point hadn't done a lot of public, you know, weren't talking to the public all the time, are in this court hearing trying to explain how recombinant DNA works to people who like don't do this every day for a living. So like, how do you talk about it to someone who is like, okay, but what is DNA? Where is it? What's it doing? Like, how does it work? And I sort of love like that, like pop culture and all of that just like combines to create this like perfect storm of a moment. And yeah, if you get a chance to watch the movie, you should. It's great. It's it's great in that sort of 70s sci-fi horror sort of way.
Yeah. I love that.
I love that story. It's so fascinating to me too, as someone who worked in bioengineering and like did my PhD in it, like how little we learn about that. Like I remember reading Siddhartha Mukherjee's The Gene, and he like talks a lot about the history of like a lot of the policies around genetic engineering that I just had no clue about. Like I just had no idea that there was a meeting of scientists to figure out what kind of work should we be doing? How should we be doing it? I just took it completely for granted that the way that we were doing research is the way that you do research.
I mean, hey, that's why we like to talk about history, right? It's always with us.
Speaking of which, terrible segue here. So the episode today is called The Mothers of Gynecology. And I am curious, like, what was it that inspired you and your team to produce this episode?
Yeah, well, we were working on an entire season dedicated to exploring the role of race and medical science. And we were looking for stories where we could talk about where is race sort of embedded in science in places particularly that we don't even think about, or that we take for granted. And one of those areas is the maternal mortality rate, which is sort of abysmal in this country. And we got fascinated with this story because I don't know if you remember, but a few years back when Serena Williams was giving birth, she was talking about this experience of having this health scare and having no one listen to her. And in fact, how her pain was ignored and sort of all these things that we were coming across while researching this season. And we sat there like, well, Serena Williams is famous and wealthy and has a ton of resources. And if she had that experience, all those resources didn't protect her from having that experience. So what is going on there? And that made us want to dive into that story. So you'll hear more about it in the episode. We do talk about that. But yeah, that made us be like, all right, what else is going on? We need to ask more questions. That's always what ends up happening. We always need to ask more questions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we should play that episode for our listeners now. Enjoy.
Welcome to Distillations. I'm Alexis Pedrick, and this is Innate, How Science Invented the Myth of Race. We're at episode 10, The Mothers of Gynecology. And before we start, a content warning for our listeners. This episode contains descriptions of violence, as well as upsetting details about complications during childbirth and pregnancy. In 2017, Serena Williams gave birth to her daughter, Alexis Olympia Ohanian Jr., via C-section.
What did you say when someone said that our little girl was going to win Wimbledon in like 15, 20 years?
Not if I'm still on tour.
In this clip from her documentary series, Being Serena, she's in her hospital bed, holding her brand new baby, joking around with her husband, and applying concealer under her eyes.
Everything went great, and I put a little makeup on so I could take pictures with the baby. And I just remember getting up and I couldn't breathe. And I was like, I can't breathe. Like I couldn't take a deep breath. I told the nurse I can't breathe. I need a mask. So I put the oxygen mask on, and I started coughing because I couldn't breathe. It hurt so bad. It hurt so bad. And then my stitches broke. And I remember I was in the bathroom with my mom, and I was just crying, and she was crying. She's like, you just gotta breathe. And I was like, I can't breathe. And it was just really hard. After that, I remember being wheeled back to the operating room because they had to reopen my C-section and re-stitch it. And then they had to check for, blood clots and everything. So they were doing all these different tests, and everything was negative.
Serena had a history of blood clots. She'd previously suffered a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that blocks the blood flow to an artery in the lung. It usually starts in a vein in the leg, and it can be fatal. When she found herself struggling to breathe, she was sure she had another one, so she told a nurse. And that nurse dismissed her, saying she must be confused from all of the pain medication. But Serena knew something was wrong. Doctors did run an ultrasound on her leg, but it showed nothing.
I'm like, listen, I need you to run a CAT scan with dye because I have a pulmonary embolism in my lungs. I know it. I've had this before. I know my body.
They ran the CAT scan, and sure enough, there it was, a pulmonary embolism.
Every day I was in the operating room for something different. It was one thing after another, and eventually I got another blood clot in my leg. So the decision was going in for a third surgery where they put a filter in me that blocks blood clots from being able to get up to my heart. I was so healthy. My pregnancy was so easy. Like, I didn't have any problems. But unfortunately, once I had the C-section, everything from there was pretty much a nightmare.
Nightmare is actually a good word, because the maternal mortality rate in the United States is abysmal. Not only that, over the past 5 years, it's been getting worse. For the purposes of this story, we're going to be using the word women, but we want to make sure we state here that we're really talking about all pregnancy-capable people. Between 800 and 900 women die from pregnancy-related complications each year, and there are huge racial disparities. Black women are 3 times more likely to die than white women. And yes, that experience extends to celebrities. Serena Williams told her harrowing birth story in Vogue magazine in 2018. Later that year, Beyoncé shared her own traumatic experience giving birth to her twins. Here's Monica McLemore, a professor of nursing and public health and self-described anti-racist birth equity scholar. She tells the story of these two superstars often.
But when you think about Serena Williams and what happened to her and Beyoncé, I always like to remind people of a couple of things. Number one, they both lived. They both survived their pregnancies.
Survived and thrived. Serena competed in the French Open just 9 months postpartum, and Beyoncé headlined Coachella less than a year after her twins were born. They were 2 of the lucky ones, but they're also part of another statistic.
And they are what we call near misses. So again, if the deaths are between 800 and 900 every year because of pregnancy complications, we estimate that there are 50,000 near misses. And that's an underestimate. And those are the pieces that we also need to be talking about as well, because in my opinion, we've seen that those are the areas where we could intervene, had we intervened sooner, that we might have mitigated some of those traumatic birth experiences.
Experts think about half of these fatalities and near misses are preventable. When we started working on this episode, that statistic about Black women being 3 times more likely to die came up a lot. And then our senior producer, Mariel Carr, came across a new book by an obstetrician named Monique Rainford. It was called Pregnant While Black: Advancing Justice for Maternal Health in America. And she phrased that statistic a little bit differently. It wasn't just Black women are 3 times more likely to die. It was, quote, if she is described as Black, she's 3 times more likely to die from her pregnancy than if she is described as white.
That was definitely intentional.
Monique wanted to be clear. There is nothing innately wrong or flawed or different about Black women's bodies.
The genetic differences within races are actually greater than between races. And a person who may look Black and be described as Black may have more genetic similarities to someone who looks white and described as white than they do to someone else who also looks Black and is described as Black.
The problem isn't race, it's racism. But what does that mean? Are we talking about individual doctors who are overtly racist and mistreat their patients? No, though clearly that does exist. What we're talking about are the things that fall between systemic racism, the policies and structures throughout society that harm people of color, and implicit bias, a kind of unintentional but still harmful kind of discrimination and judgment. So that's where we're going to take you for this last episode, into the causes of this harrowing statistic. And to do that, we're going to introduce you to 8 women, 2 of whom you've already met, who have been working on this problem for a long time. They're going to help us understand how we got here, why it's so complicated, and what we can do about it for the future. Chapter 1: The History of Gynecology. History's not just what we do, it's also a good place to start. The field of gynecology has a pretty well-known history, but we wanted to think about it in terms of this specific issue. So we went to historian of medicine Deidre Cooper Owens. She's the author of Medical Bondage: Race, Gender, and the Origins of American Gynecology.
The development of American gynecology had deep linkages to the institution of American slavery, but so much was happening in the slaveholding South, largely because of access to enslaved people's bodies.
Her book covers a man named James Marion Sims, who's often called the father of American gynecology. He also invented the speculum, something half of our adult population is still intimately familiar with today. Now, these accomplishments have improved the health of countless people, no doubt, but they relied on exploiting and abusing the bodies of enslaved women who did not and could not give their consent. And before you go thinking we're going to chalk this whole issue up to a lone bad guy, we're not. I mean, if you've been listening to this whole season, you know that Sims wasn't uniquely evil.
He is just representative of a structure that had already been in place. It was the nature of 19th century medicine. They're robbing the graves of paupers and criminals and enslaved people. In the South, you have this almost 4 million person patient population or possible patient population.
In a small hospital on his property near Montgomery, Alabama, Sims spent 5 years performing experimental surgeries on enslaved women who he leased from their captors.
They have no real autonomy. They don't have ownership over their bodies. So what the doctors are really doing, they're asking the owners, hey, can I remove Betsy or whomever from the farm or the plantation so that I can bring her to my hospital or my office to fix her?
We know the names of at least 3 of them: Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, though there were about 9 more unnamed women. Sims performed 30 surgeries on Anarcha alone. The field of gynecology was dependent on slavery, and slavery was dependent on medical science. Doctors in the South were indispensable to the institution of it, especially during the mid-1800s, when the international slave trade had been abolished.
Black women's bodies are the vessels that perpetuate U.S.-based slavery. Medicine becomes a part of that when you start to have the professional growth of slavery. So sometimes my students are really shocked when they find that there were slave management journals. Most of the questions that came in, and many of the articles written in these plantation management journals, were about how to keep enslaved people healthy, but more importantly, how do I ensure that my enslaved woman has a healthy and successful birth? It takes up so much space in those journals.
So this is the world that Sims is working in. One where the myth that Black bodies were innately different from white bodies was pointed to as justification for enslaving human beings and used as an excuse to experiment on them because of a belief in what Deidre Cooper Owens calls the medical superbody. Here's how she explains the concept.
These bodies were exceptionally strong physically. They were almost masculinized bodies. These bodies could withstand pain, all of these kinds of things. So it's a super body in that sense. But at the same time, it's a devalued body.
This idea that Black people don't experience pain has come up a lot this season. It showed up in episode 2 when historian of medicine Ronna Hogarth described how founding father Benjamin Rush pushed the theory that Black skin pigmentation resulted from leprosy. Yes, this was an article back in 1799.
There's this sort of arresting passage by Rush, actually, where he talks about Black people being insensible to pain, right? That they don't seem to suffer as much.
And even Rush didn't invent this idea. He was just repeating what another doctor in Jamaica had observed. That doctor wrote, quote, "They bear surgical operations much better than white people, and what would be a cause of insupportable pain to a white man, a Negro would almost disregard. I have amputated the legs of many Negroes who have held the upper part of the limb themselves," unquote. It's horrifying. And as the scientific literature proves, it was a myth with staying power. Fast forward to James Marion Sims, performing his experimental surgeries, and it's not surprising that he writes of patients withstanding abnormal amounts of pain, not seeming bothered, etc. But here's the catch. It was obviously not true. Deidre Cooper Owens found that fact hiding in Sims's own records. She uncovered the real experience of the women between the lines.
So there might be a sentence or two that talks about how this patient resisted and they had to be further restrained so that the surgery could go on. And I'm saying, wait, if there was a medical and scientific belief that Black people didn't experience pain, why restrain them? And so the words say one thing, but the practice says something entirely different. So they're restraining Black patients just as they do white patients, right? They are trying the same surgical methods on Black patients as they do white patients. The only difference might be they don't give Black people the benefit of the doubt when Black people are saying this hurts, or they don't give them pain relieving medicines, those kinds of things, because of this sense that Black people are not truthful, but also Black people don't experience pain in the same ways and that they can manage pain, right? And so what I wanted to do was to show how we could also read against the grain when we center the lives and the perspectives of Black women.
Sims's experiment perpetuated slavery by keeping enslaved women's reproductive systems functioning. But there was another huge reason for his work.
When they find these cures, they are treating all women, and that includes white women.
He was perfecting the surgical procedure for white women, which maybe makes you wonder, if Black bodies and white bodies were believed to be so different, how is this logical?
There is so much racial fiction, but also hypocrisy. You know, when I first started giving talks, a lot of the students and people in the audience, they're just like, it doesn't make sense. They're using Black bodies to cure white bodies. Ultimately, these folk have to know it's false. I'm like, of course they do. Despite all of the scientific and medical beliefs about Black people, they ultimately know that if they cut open a Black woman's body, right, they're going to find not a Black cervix, not Black fallopian tubes. They're going to find fallopian tubes, and they're going to be human, human fallopian tubes, human cervixes, all of those kinds of things. So they understand that they are still practicing on humans who are the same, who are identical to white women, but they have to write a narrative that bends and fits into a segregationist, anti-Black point of view. So this is entirely a space where these folk are governed by anti-Blackness every step of the way.
Chapter 2. Breaking Down the Causes. You met Monique Rainford at the beginning of our story. She spent many years as a full-time practicing obstetrician, but recently turned her energy towards solving this problem.
Sometimes a cause chooses you. You do not necessarily choose the cause. I didn't know this is what I was going to do with my life, to be quite honest. However, fast forward 2016, 2017, I began to learn more of the causes. And then knowing all I knew about obstetrics, knowing all I knew about delivering care, knowing all I knew about improving outcome, I felt an internal push to try to learn more about it and try to do something about it.
Monique was in medical school at Harvard in the 1990s when she first learned about the disparities between Black and white maternal health.
I was told that it was related to economic factors. It didn't quite make sense to me because that just didn't seem like the whole story.
She remembers being shown a statistic that said things were worse in the U.S. than they were in Jamaica, where she was raised.
And I knew instantly that it couldn't just be about economics because Jamaica is a developing country. And if it's about poverty, it could not be that in a developing country, it would be better if it were only based on poverty alone.
Monique was right. It's not just about socioeconomic status. Serena Williams and Beyoncé make that point clear. And Monica McLemore, who you also met at the start of the episode, has proven it in a study she conducted called the Giving Voice to Mothers Project. It surveyed more than 3,200 people in all 50 states.
The things that protect other, racial groups are not protective of Black women, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of education, regardless of income. That risk of dying or being a near miss during pregnancy and childbirth is equitable. And that really led us to ask some very important questions. Okay, well, if the risk is equitably shared, then what's the common characteristic, or what is the common cause? And a lot of people wanted to point to us and say, well, clearly there's something genetically wrong with Black people, that this is happening to them. In the qualitative work that we conducted and in the survey work that we did in the Giving Voice to Mothers project, Black skin does nothing except overexpose people to racism.
We said it once, but it bears repeating. It's not the race, it's the racism. But let's break that down, shall we? Cause number 1, the pain myth. Confession. We didn't just start with Sims and the history of gynecology to give you context. We also wanted to establish a timeline so that when we give you this next date, you can count backwards past Sims, past Benjamin Rush, and the decades and decades of medical literature before Rush to see how long this myth has endured. Are you ready? 2016. That's right. Racial myths baked into the system hundreds of years ago still impact healthcare today, and that year isn't arbitrary, it's the date of an actual study. Here's Kelly Hoffman, the behavioral scientist who led it.
Racial disparities in health and healthcare have been pervasive for a very long time. And in the area of pain management, they're particularly stark. So Black patients are systematically undertreated for pain relative to white patients.
Kelly Hoffman and her co-authors wanted to drill down and figure out why this was. Like the racial disparities in maternal deaths, access to healthcare has been pointed to as one explanation. But this study focused on something else.
This idea that people don't recognize the pain of Black patients and therefore they don't treat it.
They surveyed medical students and residents at the University of Virginia, separated out by race as well as lay people.
We wanted to examine whether people with and without medical training hold these kinds of false beliefs about the Black versus the white body. So beliefs that Black people's skin is thicker than white people's skin, or that their blood coagulates more quickly.
There was also this one, that the nerve endings of Black people are less sensitive than the nerve endings of white people.
And then we showed them case studies about a Black patient and about a white patient. And we asked them, how much pain is this patient experiencing on a scale from 0 to 10? And then we also asked them to write in what would they recommend for treatment for this pain. And so we had a few surprising findings. So one was just the sheer amount of endorsement of these false biological beliefs.
More than half of the white medical students and residents held at least one false belief about biological differences.
So that Black bodies are just different than white bodies. And moreover, that predicted racial bias in pain perception and treatment. So people who more strongly endorse these false beliefs thought that a Black patient would feel less pain than a white patient, and they were less accurate in their treatment recommendations for the pain. Right? And so this was evidence that not only do people with medical training have these false beliefs about biological differences, but that it may be contributing not just to perceiving the pain of a Black patient differently, but to also treating them differently.
And this plays a part in Black women's birthing experiences. Monica McLemore has found in her research that Black women were more likely to experience failure in their pain medication and have providers ignore their pain and anxiety. And Kelly Hoffman's study didn't only come up when we talked with Monica, it actually came up in most of our interviews. Here's Rana Hogarth.
Yeah, when that came out, some people were shocked, and then there were the historians of medicine who study race who were not shocked. I will say, though, that I don't know that the residents or the folks that were actually surveyed, if they are familiar, like what medical literature they're familiar with, or if this is just sort of hearsay. Like, I tend to think it might be just things they've heard in the ether. Like, I don't know that they have actually read a text or a dermatology book or something that literally is still perpetuating these kinds of ideas. That actually makes it more terrifying to me, that it's sort of lore, right? That I can't pinpoint an origin. It sounded like something that people would believe. This is my whole thing about the uncritical like acceptance, where if somebody says, oh yeah, I heard that their skin is thicker, or I've heard that they don't suffer as much, at that moment, it's not the moment to shrug. It's the moment to say, wait, what? Where are you getting that from?
Monique Rainford told us that she too was familiar with the study.
And it's disappointing, I should say, not shocking to me anymore, but disappointing. But the studies have shown that healthcare professionals have the same level of implicit bias as anybody else. And that's why it's dangerous.
Cause number 2, medical mistreatment. The World Health Organization has called maternal deaths in the United States a violation of human rights, and they point to mistreatment in maternity care as being part of the problem. When Monica McLemore did her survey back in 2019, the study defined mistreatment as being shouted at or scolded by a healthcare provider, healthcare providers ignoring and or refusing requests for help, or failing to respond to requests for help in a reasonable amount of time, violations of physical privacy, healthcare providers threatening to withhold treatment, or forcing people to accept treatment that they didn't want. Keep those definitions in mind. Now, how many people reported mistreatment in her survey? 1 in 6.
However, when we drilled down to race and ethnicity, the statistics got even worse. So when we looked at it for Black and Native Indigenous individuals, they were 4 to 5 times more likely to experience mistreatment. People reported not feeling heard or not being listened to, and they had to ask repeatedly over and over for things like, there's something wrong in my body, I need, pain medication, there's something not right in my legs, so that was the not being listened to, not being heard.
If a Black woman says, no, I don't feel comfortable with that person is not treating me well. Oh, they didn't mean that. Oh, don't worry about that. No, that's not really happening. Oh, what you feel. Oh, you didn't really feel. And the people who say that, they don't mean to be harmful, but they don't recognize it, and they can't recognize it sometimes. And that's some of the nuances, I'd like to say, of implicit bias.
Sound familiar? Serena Williams had to demand that CT scan. The nurse was dismissive at first. Still, she survived. A woman named Shalon Irving wasn't so lucky. This is Monique Rainford giving a TED Talk in 2018.
Shalon is who I would call a superstar. She was a lieutenant commander for the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps and an epidemiologist for the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. She earned 2 master's degrees and a double PhD. But Shalon also had a dream of becoming a mother. A dream that, despite many odds, came true. And after a risky pregnancy, she had a safe cesarean delivery of a beautiful baby girl, Soleil.
A week after she went home, Shalon developed a wound complication. It was missed by the first doctor she saw, but another one caught it and treated it. Still, she kept feeling sick and was seen by doctors 4 times.
On 2 of those occasions, her blood pressures were so high that, according to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, they should have been treated with urgent hypertensive therapy. They weren't. On her last attempt to get help, a nurse practitioner sent her home with a prescription for blood pressure medicine and said, "There's nothing we can do. You just have to wait. Give it more time." The only time she got was 5 more hours that evening and 4 days on life support. She was only 36 years old.
The autopsy revealed complications of hypertension, a big cause of postpartum deaths. This is her mother, Wanda Irving, in a clip from NPR.
She thought they were not paying attention. She did indicate that, yeah, Mom, they never listened to us.
If doctors and nurses had listened to Shalon and admitted her to the hospital, she would still be here today. And it makes us think about Serena Williams. I mean, what if she wasn't a famous superstar? What if she wasn't known throughout the world for her physical abilities and her knowledge of her own body? Would her medical team have listened to her? Would she have made it?
Now imagine how arrogant you have to be. If you are a, multi-million-dollar world-class athlete who makes your living from your own physical conditioning, imagine how arrogant you have to be as a clinical health care provider not to listen to that person.
Both Serena Williams and Shalon Irving were successful and educated. They got the care at the best hospitals. People couldn't point to their stories and make up socioeconomic excuses anymore.
I think it sort of was a wake-up call to a lot of people when their cases got publicized.
This is Arlene Geronimus, a public health researcher we're going to hear from more in a bit.
I think that catches the public's attention and really does sort of say, wait a minute, we've been thinking about this too stereotypically and too simply.
The flip side of being denied care is getting unwanted care, being coerced into something that wasn't part of your birth plan. And a glaring example of this is also a contributing factor to pregnancy complications and death. Cause number 3, C-sections.
While generally speaking, as obstetricians, we think we can deliver you safely with a cesarean section, we are exposing a mother to more risk, and those risks can be fatal.
Risks include excessive bleeding at delivery, which potentially requires a hysterectomy. There's also uterine rupture, wound complications and infection, and complications of anesthesia and surgery. And like all other maternal health risks, African American women are worse off. They get more C-sections than white women, even when they have no identifiable risk factors.
When we look at the Black Belt South, places like Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Black women's bodies are still disproportionately being used by physicians for C-section surgeries. So literally from the 1830s until 2021, these states that have huge Black populations, I'm talking about 30%, 40% plus, their bodies are being used in the same ways that their foremothers were being used in the 19th century. And so that means the 19th century, the 20th century, and we're now in the 21st century. And the stats have not changed very much. I think the longer legacy, if we put the past and the present together, is when we think about the ways that Black women's bodies have been used, and I might say boldly abused in obstetrics and gynecology, is based on some of these older ideas.
Something called a VBAC calculator has contributed to some of these excess C-sections. VBAC stands for vaginal birth after cesarean section, and the calculator isn't a physical tool, it's basically a questionnaire. If you've already had a C-section and want to try and have a vaginal birth, you answer questions about your age, height, weight, delivery history, and then whether you're African American or Hispanic. It tallies up your answers into a score, and checking African American or Hispanic can result in a significantly lower score, which meant the likelihood of a successful vaginal delivery was lower.
And so if you think going in as an obstetrician that, chances aren't that good, you may give up quicker. If you think the chances are really great, maybe you try a little harder. And so you can see how that could have been part of the reason why Black women or why Black women have a higher cesarean section rate. Just one part of it, because it's complex. Everything is complex. Everything has multiple factors. But why Black women have higher cesarean section rates than white women in America.
There's good news, though. In 2021, race was removed from the calculator, in part because of a study by an obstetrician named Shaquilla Faulkner. She found that almost half the Black women in the study had unfavorable scores when they listed their race, but only 12% of them did when they didn't include it. Why was race there to begin with? It's not clear.
Maybe I can say this: garbage in, garbage out. So if the stuff is biased, then the tools will be biased. If the input is biased, the tools will be biased.
Beyond VBACs, Monique Rainford has some theories about why Black women get more C-sections, and they're informed by her experience as an obstetrician. She says that waiting for a laboring woman to give birth takes time and patience. And since obstetricians likely have the same level of implicit bias as other health professionals, which is the same as everybody else, maybe those biases lead to them not giving patients their, patience. Maybe they encourage them to have surgery too quickly, or maybe, she says, a lack of connection or trust leads to the patient herself to choose a C-section because she just wants the baby to arrive safely. Which leads us to our next cause: lack of trust. As an experienced Black obstetrician, Monique Rainford has a lot of patients seeking her help.
I get emails, I get requests. Do you know any Black obstetricians? Thankfully, I know a few I can refer to, but it's disheartening when Black patients say, I'm scared, I don't know who to go to, I'm getting care at a certain location and I don't feel heard, I don't feel they're addressing my needs, and it erodes trust. Because if the person who's taking care of you doesn't believe you, then how can you believe them? The best situations are when the patient and I have a relationship where we're working together to ensure that the care that's delivered to them is great quality care. And they value my opinion, and I listen to them and value what they have to say. And we try to get the best outcome. When that trust is violated or not even built, that compromising care.
Studies have shown that both mothers and babies fare better when they have a Black doctor or midwife, which is kind of good news. Only there's a problem.
There are not enough Black obstetricians in everywhere that Black women need them for Black women to have a Black obstetrician or a Black midwife. There's just not enough at this point. So on the one hand, we want to train more Black obstetricians. We want to and need to train more Black obstetricians. We want to need to train more Black midwives on the one hand. But on the other hand, we also need to ensure that regardless of race, that our obstetrician or midwives are culturally sensitive, because I know for sure that there are many non-Black physicians who can deliver the kind of care that Black women need.
This is Wangoy Moy Guy, a historian of medicine, race, and gender.
For over 300 years, midwives were the main source and providers of care. And many of these early midwives were Black. They were, they survived the horrors of the Middle Passage. And so as obstetrics is putting in place this sort of modern understanding of how to manage births, midwifery is characterized as backward. Even as studies at that time are showing that births attended by midwives resulted in fewer deaths.
The reasons why are complex, but hearing how the care midwives delivered was different from obstetricians seems to offer some lessons we can still learn from.
Midwives listen. They are there to help you through your misery and pain. They remain in the days afterwards, not only tending to the mother and the newborn, but also providing household support. And midwives also describe that their work continued until 2 weeks out, that investment, that time spent with mother, a newborn, a family unit is a completely different level of commitment and attention than a physician who's probably measuring the time in minutes and hours and not in days and weeks.
Today, there's a growing movement of Black midwives, and they do incredible work. And they're certainly part of the solution. But there aren't nearly enough of them, and they alone can't solve the problem. One reason is something called risking out.
Midwives are basically trained to address low-risk pregnancy. I say basically because midwives, under guidance and with increased training, can handle higher risk pregnancies, but basically they handle low risk. So what happens is, and this happens, I've read examples and know of examples, a Black woman enters the care of a midwife, but she risks out of it, meaning she becomes high risk and she has to leave the midwife and go to an obstetrician because of her risk factors. So midwives are very important, but they can't do everything.
Risking out has to do with our next cause, weathering. We've spent this whole season telling you that race is not a biological thing. There's no Black hypertension gene, no diseases that Black people are innately immune to, no innate differences in pain tolerance. Race is not real. But racism? Racism is very real, and it turns out it can take a biological toll on the body. Monica McLemore's research has attached hard data to prove the mistreatment Black women experience during pregnancy and childbirth. Meanwhile, public health researcher Arlene Geronimus has shown how exactly that racism impacts health. She's just published a book called Weathering: The Extraordinary Stress of Ordinary Life in an Unjust Society.
Stress is a very broad word. And, what one person calls stressful is very different from, the stresses that a soldier feels on a battlefield, or maybe not feeling the very same thing as a member of a deeply marginalized group feels on a daily basis for many different reasons.
She coined the term weathering decades ago to describe how certain kinds of chronic stressors, things like poverty, hunger, abuse, and, yes, everyday racism one experiences being Black in America, how all of these wear the body down, accelerate aging, and lead to chronic diseases. Now, weathering doesn't only happen because of racism. It's also caused by other kinds of chronic stressors. In fact, studies have shown similar effects on parents of children with developmental disabilities. But the stress of racism is a big one. The physiology behind it is something that's actually a protective mechanism. It's called fight or flight.
The kind of archetypal story is you're on the savannah and, some wild animal comes lunging at you and automatically, so it's not conscious. You're scared. So I'm not saying you don't perceive that animal, but you don't consciously set off these physiological reactions, which are aimed to make it more likely for you to be able to survive that attack, either because you flee or you fight successfully, or even if you're mauled to some extent, your immune system has been mobilized, so you may survive even the attack.
This is what's happening inside your body. Stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, start flooding your bloodstream. And as a result, fats and sugars are catapulted into your bloodstream to give you energy to fight or run. Extra oxygenated blood is pumped faster to your large muscles, to your heart, all to help you beat the animal. But at the same time, your other organs and tissues aren't getting the same kinds of nutrients. And if you're pregnant, neither is your fetus.
That's meant to be turned on once in a great while in an emergency, and then it lasts for 3 minutes-ish. And then you may be dead, or you may have successfully fled or scared the raging beast away. So it's very protective in a true life or death situation.
The problem is that this same mechanism is triggered over and over and over again by so many situations that do not involve a cheat on the savannah. Maybe you're just going for a prenatal appointment, but you've dealt with all the negative treatment from a nurse in the past. Our bodies can react even when there isn't an immediate threat. There's just the threat of a threat.
If you have reason from your past experience, like if you're, let's say you are in the savannah and you've been mauled before, you're kind of making an unconscious, calculated though, decision that this may be a false alarm, it may be a true alarm, but better to be safe than sorry.
This anticipation of a threat, walking into a space where you don't know how you'll be treated, and you have to be vigilant in case you're under threat, it provokes the same response.
It's not even something we're necessarily conscious of. And even if we're conscious of the original stressor that provoked the physiological stress reaction, that reaction can continue well beyond the event. And in our sleep, for instance, if our heart rate is elevated, it can stay elevated while you're sleeping. So it's sort of a chronic activation of this physiological stress response that's specific to being in a deplored or exploited and marginalized group.
Over time, your organs start to feel the effects. Take your heart, which has been in overdrive from all of these responses.
Your heart can get enlarged like any exercising muscle would get enlarged the more it's exercised. By pushing the blood flow so strongly through your arteries, you eventually will get high blood pressure or hypertension.
You can also start to corrode those arteries. Plaque will build up from the white blood cells that are constantly rushing.
That plaque can become embolisms or heart disease or strokes. Your immune system gets dysregulated from all the false alarms.
So maybe your immune system gets weakened, or maybe it goes on overdrive and you get an autoimmune disease.
So you can see the ways that people who are in those marginalized groups are kind of made more vulnerable across their bodies, either because some of their systems and organs have gotten too much attention or others have not gotten enough. So you're kind of worn and torn everywhere for one of those reasons. As I see it, weathering explains a lot about why certain populations have so much worse health and across so many different diseases and conditions.
Chapter 4. How do we solve it? Like we said earlier, there's no one easy solution. For this story alone, we talked to 3 historians, 2 public health researchers, 1 behavioral scientist, an obstetrician, and a midwife. And we need all of their work. We need everyone to help solve this problem. And it might seem like a tall order, but we're feeling hopeful. Here's the midwife we spoke to.
My name is Annie Johnson, and I'm a nurse midwife, and I live in Portland, Oregon. The midwifery clinic that I work for started in a trailer in the parking lot of the hospital. So there are a bunch of nurse midwives that showed up and were like, we want to take care of patients here. What patients can we have, basically? And the doctors were like, there are all these poor, mostly Black women who live in this neighborhood and they don't pay anything, basically. Like, we don't want to take care of these patients because their insurance isn't worth anything. And the midwives were like, great, we want to take care of them.
Her clinic, Legacy Medical Center, since moved inside the hospital, but they're still taking care of the same kinds of patients. Annie is African American, and she's experienced all these biases, implicit and not, in her own healthcare. She's only one person, but she believes midwives are a solution to this long legacy of racism. One thing the clinic does is take communication very seriously.
We have a practice where you can call and talk to a midwife 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. Like, that's what, when you're caring for people who are busy, who don't have a lot of money, who don't have transportation, what they need is for you to pick up the phone when they call. And I think that that makes a huge difference to patients, right? If you call at 3 a.m., you'll get a midwife. When somebody calls, I'm like, what do they need? What is the problem that they're noticing? What's the information that they have that I don't, that's going to allow me to take care of them? And I think in a lot of other health systems, it's just way more complicated to get to a person that's going to help you.
And they are accessible. literally.
We have transportation for people. We have cabs. We have medical transport. We have food bags in our clinic now that we're giving out to people because people don't have food. People come to us because we have the things that they actually need. The medical system is like trying to check off all these boxes that are not important to patients, right? I'm like, if I have all your prenatal labs, right? Like, I care because that's part of my job of taking care of you, but like, that doesn't mean anything to patients. What they care about is if they're hungry and you have food and you're going to give them a grocery bag to feed their kids every single week. Like, that's what's making them come back to their prenatal appointment, not the fact that you check to see if they could be susceptible to rubella.
Annie Johnson made one more point that often gets lost when we talk about how to save lives.
Thing that we tell women all the time is the most important thing is healthy mom and healthy baby. And it's telling people that if we saved you and your baby, you should be grateful no matter what your experience was. And I'm like, that's not it. We had a patient who had a demise with our practice who came back, and I did her early ultrasound, and I was like, oh, you must be like, are you feeling nervous today? I was kind of assuming that she would be feeling nervous because her last experience coming to us was having a baby die and then having that baby delivered by our practice. And she was just like, I'm not nervous at all. Our family was like so held and taken care of by this practice of people while we were going through this tragedy and grief. Like, she didn't have any trauma. And I was like, that's amazing. The outcome is not necessarily the most important thing. Like, I feel like the experience of the woman and the family of giving birth is, in my mind, the most important thing.
Human beings, we are so complex, and I hate that science doesn't really capture this notion that yes, people can have hardship, people can have traumatic birth experiences, still come out of it knowing that they will develop the skills that they need in order to be a good parent. People need the supports that will allow them to take those roles on with dignity.
In addition to midwives, doulas are also a crucial part of the solution. A doula is not a medical professional. They're someone who attends births to give social support. And research has shown that they lead to better outcomes for everyone.
Patients don't necessarily use the same language that we use to describe things, but I know for me as a nurse, when my spidey senses are very attuned to when someone tells me that something just doesn't feel right. And to dismiss their concerns or to dismiss their claims because they're not using the same language that we would use, I think is a real mistake and a real error. That's why a lot of people talk about doulas and other birth workers as a potential part of the solution. It's not that doulas are going to solve maternal morbidity and mortality, but one thing doulas do very, very well is they can serve as that interpreter. They can help with that lost in translation of really helping to help healthcare providers really know when they need to escalate levels of care. It's another set of eyes on pregnant and postpartum.
And history itself is part of the solution. Both Rana Hogarth and Deidre Cooper Owens now visit medical schools to teach these legacies of medical racism. Medical students and residents are learning where bias has been baked into medicine. The next step is undoing it, something that's already happening. Deidre attends grand rounds at various medical schools, including Jefferson University Hospital here in Philadelphia, where James Marion Sims himself was once a student.
I'm grateful in the ways that physicians and nurses in particular are really being mindful, I think, of medical racism and the ways that they can dismantle it. Many of them are really doing the work because I think ultimately, who wants to see pregnant people and their children die? We want them to live. We want them to have a good quality of life. And so I am really hopeful that this will continue and there will not be the kind of fatigue around talks of race, but that we will really stay committed to eradicating these disparities.
I'm an optimist in many ways. I wouldn't take on something if I didn't think I could do something to make it better, if I thought it was futile, because to put a lot of energy and work in something that you think is futile, you just can't. You have to believe. So I firmly believe, and I am committed to continuing to do work, to do what I can to make a difference and try to eliminate these health disparities.
We called this episode Mothers of Gynecology. That name was inspired by Deidre Cooper Owens. One day during the writing process, she was reviewing the book with a friend at her home. When Deidre mentioned that James Marion Sims is called the father of gynecology, her friend's daughter's ears perked up.
And so I guess her daughter kept hearing me say, "Father, father." And she's like, "Well, where are the mothers?" And I thought, yeah, where are the mothers? And so immediately, it made sense that these were truly the mothers of gynecology. And it wasn't a reach in the Sims case in particular, because when his 2 white male surgical assistants quit because he was failing so much at trying to repair these women's issues, he then taught the women how to serve as his surgical assistants. And so in a very real sense, these enslaved women that Sims operated on and also made to labor as nurses and surgical assistants, they helped him develop this medical branch. They helped him develop the surgical repair for what today we call obstetrical fistula surgeries. And so I think they very much need to be recognized in their roles as the mothers of American gynecology. It kind of balances the scales.
So who's coming to save the day? Well, turn and look at all the women we've introduced you to in this episode. They're the daughters of gynecology. They're solving the problem. How much more future-facing can you get? In fact, that's what we want to leave you with for the season. Yes, science invented the myth of race, but science is done by people. And when we make something, we can certainly unmake it. And hopefully, this will be a whole different world for another generation of children, of scientists, historians, researchers, podcasters. This episode was reported and produced by Mariel Carr, and it was mixed by Jonathan Pfeffer, who also composed the innate theme music. Distillations is more than a podcast. It's also a multimedia magazine. You can find our videos, stories, and podcasts at distillations.org. And you'll also find podcast transcripts and resource lists. You can follow the Science History Institute on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for news and updates about the podcast and everything else going on in our museum, library, and research center. The Science History Institute remains committed to revealing the role of science in our world. Please support our efforts at sciencehistory.org/givenow. I'm Alexis Pedrick. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back. That was an incredible episode, and we thought we would take the next few minutes to ask Alexis maybe a couple more questions, recap a little bit. Is there anything that in particular that really struck you, Deboki?
I mean, first of all, everything. Just the breadth of who you all talked to I really appreciated, like historians, midwives, doulas. I think the line that will always stick with me from this episode comes towards the end, where I think it was one of the midwives you talked to said something about how it's not the outcome, it's the experience that's so important for pregnant people, of knowing just that the way that you're being cared for and listened to is so vital. And I think anyone who's gone through any kind of medical condition or any kind of interaction with the medical community understands how difficult that can be to get. And then seeing the ways that it's heightened through these very clear issues of racism in medicine that have been pervasive for so long. A lot of times what people are looking for is just to be taken care of.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's fascinating, right? Because, this process of giving birth, right, of bringing sort of this other human being into the world is a process of you instantly sort of becoming a caretaker for someone else, right? And that in that moment you have to advocate both for this new person that's coming into the world and also for yourself at the same time. And I think it's a really vulnerable moment. And I think that point about making sure that you're well taken care of, that you feel well taken care of and listened to is vital. And I think that's why so early on we started with that pain study. We read about that pain study, and we were fascinated by it, and also horrified by it. But it speaks, I think, to really what that idea is, that if the people who are responsible for making sure you are taken care of believe that because of the color of your skin, you feel less pain, that you experience things biologically in a different way. If they believe that, then the chances of your care reflecting that are much higher. The chances of you not getting that protection and that support are higher. And I think that's what I mean when we talk about like race and science. It's not like it shows up. I think we often talk about it as showing up as someone saying something to you in the delivery room, or whether or not we're in an era where they're not separate hospitals, right? And that's not really what we're talking about. That race can be involved in science in ways that can be insidious because it's hidden.
Yeah. So something that I want to briefly talk about, I'm a little embarrassed that I hadn't made this connection myself beforehand. But there's this point in the episode where you talk about hypocrisy in race-based medicine. The whole narrative, I will say, is that like white people and Black people are biologically different. That's not true. Just want to say that right out the gate. But that was a belief that was being perpetuated, even though it was not founded in anything. So all of this experimentation is going on Black people, on Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And then what is learned from that is being applied to white women.
Yes.
And like to the benefit of white women. And so then the question is, okay, so if Black women and white women are apparently inherently different, how are we applying the same medical techniques? It was just, so that was one of those things where I'm like, yeah, that is really hypocritical. It's so blatant.
Yeah. And you don't think about it that way. Deidre Cooper Owens, who is just phenomenal. And really, we learned so much from talking to her, particularly driving that point home. And it sort of is saying up front that we actually really don't believe this. Like this idea that there's a biological basis for race and that's what separates us and makes us different, that even the people who are espousing that's not really true. Because as you pointed out, if that were the case, we wouldn't have this situation, right? James Marion Sims would not spend this time doing these experiments on these women and using it would be then that data would be useless, but it's not, right? And so, yeah. And I think, again, that's another way that like it creeps into how we practice medicine, how we practice science. But it's insidious, right? It doesn't seem like that's a place where race lives or where racism lives. And it is. There's a scholar we talked to, Rana Hogarth, in another episode for this season. And she says something that really, I think, resonates with me. And she talks about how racism in science, how scientific knowledge is codified. And so if you believe something about, enslaved people not feeling pain the same way, and you write that down in your observations, your medical observations, and that becomes published as a book. And then when someone is coming along later to learn about, say, some sort of operation, to learn about gynecology, right? They're looking at those notes, right? That's what they go back to, the observations, the notes, the things that are published, right? And they don't look at those notes and say, oh, this observation about pain is wrong. They sort of take that as the baseline, right? And so when they go to write their notes, they include that as the baseline, as like just it becomes scientific truth because it keeps getting repeated and it keeps getting codified. And so I think even though this was a hard episode and a harrowing episode, it also speaks to like if we've codified it, we can actually unmake that, right? We can actually change that. That's within our power. We can go back and say, oh, these are the places where we had this inherent belief and we got it wrong, and we can stop perpetuating that.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point because like that is theoretically supposed to be part of the point of science is that we're not supposed to take these ideas for granted. We're supposed to engage with them and challenge them. And so it's always striking when you hear these surveys, especially recently, of doctors where they're like taking this information for granted and just like, yep, that makes sense to me. That's how I'm going to treat my patients. And you're also sort of like, well, if that's, even if you think that's true, why is that informing the like this particularly dehumanizing way of treating patients? I still don't get that, except that, again, it's sort of just baked into that learning. Like you're saying, it's codified where it keeps getting passed down. And it made me think about like sort of how there's this like, I guess, original sin sort of baked into the field of gynecology and how it informs the way we treat patients at large. Like, and I don't mean this to distract from the issue of racism itself, but more to say that when you bake racism into your field from the beginning, it informs the failures later on as well. Like I think, you know, medical care for pregnancy and for women in general is so fraught, and I think it's fraught in part because of the very issues that are raised in this episode, where even if you're not Black, you're going to be informed by the racism. The treatment you get is going to be informed by the racism that other people are being even more affected by, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the if you go back in your sort of reading first person sources, the thought about how women, when they were experiencing pain, all women experiencing pain in childbirth, were sort of thought of as being hysterical. You're being, you know, like a very wild
only
thing.
A thing. I'm sorry to generalize here, but absolutely only a thing a man could say.
Yes, I mean, so I think you're right across the board. There's so much in sort of medical science that we don't think about, where work is done right, or data is only collected on men, and then it's sort of applied to women like later on. And so I think like, yeah, that experience of pain of women's like experience and knowledge not being taken seriously is ongoing. You guys get to this in your show as well, that so much of science is done by humans, right? We say this all the time, like, and humans, we bring all of our issues to the fore when we are doing science. And so science is not separated from culture or from society or from politics or from anything else going on in the world, because it's not separated from humans. And so, you know, when we were very worried, you know, about this idea about how women are supposed to behave and present themselves, right? You know, like having a sense of decorum, then that does filter into things like childbirth and like healthcare that you get. Like, I think it's inescapable because, there is no science without people. And so I like to say, people, we're all a little bit messy. We're all bringing that to the fore.
We bring that fallibility to everything we do.
Yeah, but by the same token, I love that the episode ends on a note of like, what are people doing to improve this as well? Because humans mess up.
Yes.
Humans also are meant to work to make things better. And I really liked hearing about the ways that
Absolutely.
midwives and doulas are like actively working to improve conditions for Black people who are pregnant.
Yes, absolutely. And then I think across the board for all mothers, those things make that experience better and safer. And so, yeah, I like I said, it's a hard episode. It's a hard topic. I think, we definitely, me and my producers who worked on this definitely had moments where, you cry while you're making a story, which is, can be a tough experience, but also that we hope this is a story that's also so full of hope, right? Because we can change it. We can do things to fix and to improve these experiences.
Thanks for tuning in to this special episode of Tiny Matters featuring Distillations. Tiny Matters is created by the American Chemical Society and produced by Multitude. I'm Sam Jones, and as always, I am joined by my lovely co-host, Deboki Chakravarti. Today, we are also joined by Distillations host, Alexis Pedrick. Alexis, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell our listeners where they can look for Distillations?
So actually, first of all, thank you for having me. This was incredible. You can get all of our podcasts, you can get videos, even articles on our website at sciencehistory.org. And you can also listen to us anywhere you regularly listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Spotify, any of those places.